Around at E3 when it was a thing before it eventually got cancelled, Monster Hunter World was revealed and it impressed a lot of people. Graphics have been changed drastically instead of the same graphical stuff that we've seen throughout all the years we've seen in Monster Hunter games, ranging from 1 to Generations. Even though this used the same game engine as the originals, this has a brand new graphics and somewhat of a gameplay change, but not really, but still there. There's brand new monsters along with some older ones, and there were some free updates that include some returning monsters from the series. The game also has like the same weapons as you expect, along with there being a story mode, of course, where you can also play story up to 4 players, which is nice. The only thing that was dumb is that they have a lack of a pause button. Even though you can play games solo, there's no pause button. And instead of the paintball mechanic in the game, they ended up using this firefly thing. And it can be a bit confusing to use. Now, when the game came out on PS4 and Xbox One, it actually became one of the biggest launch titles in Capcom's history, even the best-selling Monster Hunter to this day, as it broke sales records throughout most of the Capcom games that came out. And with this one too, there was a Horizon exclusive collaboration for the PS4 user base, in which it was a limited time thing, if you guys were still able to get it, that is. Now, there are some gameplay changes. Like for one, I've already mentioned this before, the Firefly thing, where you can go up to a paw print and you can scan it, but with enough of them, you can actually go ahead and follow the trail, but sometimes it gets a little confusing, like as I mentioned, because it likes to change paths sometimes. Also, some of the animations have been somewhat reworked in both the weapons and in terms of the monsters, so that's something new for you guys to look into. And if you guys were to get Iceborne, you have this claw mechanic thing, where you can go latch onto a monster, and then you can just do anything on there, like deal some damage to it. The game is somewhat in the easy spot, but it's still hard to fight these monsters. Now, the game would also later get an expansion called Iceborne, which also has its own standalone title, but this Iceborne has like this claw mechanic where you can latch onto monsters or whatnot, and you can use them to your advantage, but again, it's still difficult to play, but a lot of people called out the claw for being broken. Now, in terms of this game, Giant Monster is threatening to go to this island and destroy the place. And you have to stop it and take it out before it does something dumb, like explode the entire island, which is really bad. But in terms of this game, you can still play online with your friends and whatnot. You could do like the mainline quests. There are some online quests too, including arena stuff. But for me, I haven't found as much as I did in the previous games. But just like every other game, there are collaborations like Resident Evil and, get this, The Witcher 3. Yes, you heard me right. This game has a Witcher 3 collaboration in which, believe it or not, you can actually play as Geralt. It has its own story, and you can fight its own Witcher-themed monster. Oh, and after you complete the Geralt quest, you can actually unlock him as a nice armor layout costume for your character. I also heard this game had a complicated PC launch. Some people didn't like the launch when it first came out, but overall I think it's been fixed now, so should be have no problems. But based on playing this game, I play it on the PS4 version. Mainly because I'm just used to playing it on the PSP and Nintendo consoles at this point, so I got on the PS4, played it, and I had a blast playing it. But like I mentioned, there's new monsters along with returning old ones. There were some sporadically that made appearances in free updates, but I think the monster roster is a little bit on the low side, which doesn't seem to be a good look if you ask me. And some of the quests I really don't like, it's because it feels like I'm playing the same quest over and over when it's not. There are some subspecies like the Pink Rathian, which to my knowledge is one of the hardest Rathians I fought so far. But yeah, this actually became like the biggest Monster Hunter launch in history. which I think popularized Monster Hunter a lot further than it should have, but it has since then, which is really good, which I think got a lot of new players into Monster Hunter for the first time. I've always went back in this one, like back whenever I played the older Monster Hunters, I used the Insect Glaive, like I did in Monster Hunter 4 and Generations, but then I wasn't feeling it in this game, so I switched to Greatsword, and I actually started using that, and I went back to the old ones and started using the Greatsword, which I think is pretty funny to say. It's actually funny too, because ever since Rise came out, a lot of people still are coming back to play a Monster Hunter World to this very day. I should also mention, no more loading screens. Kind of. Well, when you're in a level, you no longer have to deal with these loading screens every time whenever you go to a zone. You can just waltz past it, and that's it. You still have your companion cats like you usually do, and it's cool to see it's all come to a thing. Now, just like the previous two Monster Hunter games I mentioned, 4 Ultimate and Generations, you can mount on monsters, but this one's been a little bit more modified, as you can say. You can still go on there and stab the monster 100 times, but the monster finds its own way to try to get you out there. It'll try to ram itself into a wall, which you can actually luckily dodge if you can. You just switch positions, keep stabbing the monster, and then you switch to another position just for certain parts. And then after the monster gets a little staggered, you can do a charge attack on top of the monster while you're standing on top of the monster. And after that, it goes down, and you can do a lot of damage to it. Capture quests are still here along your hunting quest. Now, we would get somewhat of a G rank quest, but that was only if you get Iceborne. But in terms of G rank, it's now been renamed to Master rank. I don't know why they did this, but it's still the same thing regardless. I should mention, if you guys happen to be a PlayStation user, you guys can play this game if you guys have PS Plus as part of the PS Plus collection, which also came with a whole bunch of other games that was a part of it, with the exception of Persona 5, which left the collection. You'll still get more collaborations as usual, but also a Final Fantasy quest. But for me, there really hasn't been that many quests for collaborations as far as I can tell from all the original ones. But there are some of them you may actually recognize too from other games if you even play it or if you just knew what they are. But I think after this game, that was when they started filming some Monster Hunter stuff. Like there was one with a live action movie and there was one on Netflix, which is all like CGI animated or whatever you can say. This game even won multiple awards for Best Co-op Game, Game of the Year, Excellence Awards, and Best RPG Game. Even though this isn't even a RPG game, which I don't know why it's even there. But again, it did win multiple Game of the Year awards, so this really tells you this was like one of the biggest successful Monster Hunter games that ever came out for its time. Oh yeah, and this game became one of the biggest monsters that has the terrible hitbox that I've ever seen, Nergigante. This thing, even though it doesn't touch you, the hitbox somehow touches you and you're dead. I have no idea how they didn't even check that out before they even put in the monster into the game. You guys might be telling me, well, they probably must have fixed it now. Nope. It's still the same thing. Even in recent years, it's still the same thing. So you might have to need people to take this thing out, because this is one of the hardest monsters that you'll ever fight. But what's more ironic is that the final boss of the original one is much easier than that thing. And by the way, they're going to be talking about this monster throughout the campaign, so don't be surprised if they even mention this once. You can talk to the handler about the quest, and you can eat before you go. But if you somehow forgot to eat, or if you die in the game, don't worry. You can go back to your first campsite, and there's a canteen there in which you can help you fill up your energy. It's not going to be a lot like it was in the original hubs, but it still should give you good enough to take down these monsters. I say this is a game for everyone, even if you are a regular guy or a newbie in this one. You could just talk to plenty of people as to how you can actually play the game or what kind of tips you can give to people if you guys are veterans of the game, which can really help new players. And I still see new players playing the older Monster Hunter games to this very day, like the one on the Wii U and the 3DS games. So there's plenty of people still playing Monster Hunter, new or old. Regardless, you're gonna find new players throughout daily, which they may actually ask for help. I think it's just better to talk to them because sometimes YouTube guides don't really necessarily help people in terms of anything. Because they may look good, but sometimes terrible. But that just depends on who it is or what kind of skill methods they try using. But this game has sold a lot of units, like over 20 of copies, like 20 million copies. Like this is one of the biggest launches in history, and it's still continuing to sell like crazy, even with the expansion out too. You know, there's another big change I didn't get the chance to mention. Monsters can now fight each other. Yes, that's right. Monsters can now fight each other for once. And it really, I think it might depend, but the monsters will stare at each other, and then one of them will get the best out of each other. This was later expanded on Monster Hunter Rise, but they did things a little differently. But still, you can have monsters go to the same room and they'll actually fight each other instead of just, you know, teaming up on you, which makes no sense if you think about it. And just like the rest of the series, you're gonna have like hundreds of thousands of hours of gameplay into this game, which should give you guys a lot to do in terms of hunting or maybe just helping out other people that are in need. If you always want to get hunting for newer monsters and whatnot, this is for you.